The Western music industry has always had gatekeepers. For decades, those gatekeepers operated on a simple set of unwritten rules. You had to be from here. You had to sound like here. Your name had to land cleanly on American radio. And if you didn't check those boxes, if your passport was from the wrong country, if your native language wasn't English, if your face didn't fit the template the industry had been selling for 70 years, there was a place for you. It was called the international market. And it was politely, firmly, permanently kept separate from the real prize. But somewhere between 2023 and 2026, a woman from Chiang Rai, Thailand, didn't just walk through those gates. She quietly dismantled them. And almost nobody in the mainstream press noticed exactly how she did it. Stay with us. Because by the end of this video, you'll understand why Lisa's story isn't just a K-pop crossover success. It is one of the most structurally significant industry disruptions in the history of modern music. And it happened in plain sight. Let's establish something important before we go any further. This is not a fan documentary. This is a case study. Lalisa Manobal, known globally as Lisa, was born in 1997 in Chiang Rai, a city in northern Thailand. At 14, she auditioned for YG Entertainment in Seoul, one of the most selective talent agencies in South Korea's fiercely competitive idol industry. She was the only foreign applicant among thousands to pass. She spent years in the trainee system before debuting in 2016 as the lead dancer, main rapper, and visual face of BLACKPINK, a group that went on to shatter record after record across markets no one in the industry had predicted they could reach. By the time BLACKPINK completed the Born Pink World Tour in 2023, Lisa was among the most followed musicians on the planet. Her social media presence consistently ranked among the highest of any recording artist on Earth. But here is what most coverage missed, and what we are here to analyze. Fame and followers are one thing. Structural power inside the music industry is something else entirely. What Lisa has been building, quietly and deliberately, since 2023, is not simply a solo career. It is a new operational model for how an Asian artist can function and thrive inside the Western music ecosystem, on her own terms. This story matters right now because the industry is at an inflection point. The old gatekeeping mechanisms are fracturing, and Lisa is one of the reasons why. If you want to understand where the music business is actually going, not where the headlines claim it's going, stay with us. And if this kind of structural analysis is what you're here for, subscribing keeps you inside the conversation. We don't cover gossip. We cover the mechanics behind the moments everyone else is already talking about. 1. What the Western music industry looked like before. To understand why Lisa's moves are historically significant, you have to understand the industry she walked into. Specifically, what it was designed to do, and to whom it was designed to grant access. For the better part of the 20th century, the Western pop music industry, centered in New York, Los Angeles, and London, functioned as a vertically integrated gatekeeping system. The major labels, Sony, Universal, Warner, controlled not just recording contracts, but distribution, promotion, radio access, and retail placement simultaneously. If you were not signed to one of them, or distributed through one of them, reaching Western mainstream audiences at scale was functionally impossible. Not difficult, impossible. This infrastructure had a secondary layer of filtering that was less documented, but no less operational, cultural, and racial sorting. There is a well-established and extensively discussed pattern in Western music industry history when it comes to non-Western artists attempting to enter mainstream markets. Chart access was circumscribed. Radio play was limited. Festival headlining slots, the most visible and commercially significant stages in Western live music, were reserved. And the underlying logic, whether articulated explicitly in boardrooms or simply embedded in decades of practice, was consistent. The Western consumer would tolerate but not fully embrace a pop star from Asia whose primary language was not English. The evidence was everywhere you looked. When Psy's Gangnam Style exploded globally in 2012 and broke YouTube records that had stood for years, the industry's response was illuminating. Psy has spoken publicly and at length about how difficult it proved to translate that extraordinary moment of viral breakthrough into sustained Western mainstream traction. The song was categorized and handled as a novelty. Astonishing, unprecedented, and immediately boxed. BTS cracked something open. By 2018, 2019, and into the pandemic years, BTS was selling out Western stadiums, landing at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, and proving, empirically, with ticket receipts and streaming data, that a group performing primarily in Korean could command a genuine mass American audience. That was genuinely seismic. And yet, And this is the critical structural distinction. BTS was a group. Groups are legible to the Western music industry in ways that solo acts from non-Western markets are not. Groups have a demographic logic the industry already understood. Groups can be filed neatly into an existing framework. A solo woman from Thailand, however, not Korean, not operating permanently within the scaffolding of a Korean entertainment conglomerate, building toward independence, represented something the industry's existing processing systems had no clean category for. The barriers Lisa faced going solo were distinct from what BLACKPINK faced as a collective. Within YG Entertainment's infrastructure, BLACKPINK had promotional architecture, narrative support, and built-in legitimacy. Lisa, moving toward independence, had to contend with the industry's deeply embedded skepticism about individual Asian acts in Western live and commercial markets. The language profile of her catalog was a factor. The racial dynamics of Western mainstream media were a factor. And the solo problem was the largest factor of all. No meaningful precedent existed for what she was attempting to construct. No precedent, that is, until Lisa decided to build one herself. 2. The moves nobody noticed. Here is where the story becomes a masterclass in industrial strategy. The moves Lisa has made since 2023 do not look, from the outside, like a coordinated long game. They look like an extremely famous celebrity leveraging her momentum. A label launch here, a collab there, a festival moment, a TV appearance, a residency. But look at the pattern, and the pattern is unmistakable. LLOUD. In 2023, Lisa established LLOUD, her own music and entertainment label. This was not a vanity project. This was the foundational move. In the documented history of the music business, the artists who have fundamentally altered how the industry operates have almost invariably done so by seizing ownership of their own infrastructure before the industry could set the terms. Consider what Prince's decades-long conflict with Warner Bros. Ultimately demonstrated about the economic relationship between artist and label. Consider what Taylor Swift's public battle over her master recordings revealed, not just to her fans but to an entire generation of artists, about who actually owns a catalog and what that ownership is worth. These were not personal disputes. They were structural arguments that changed what artists at every level ask for in subsequent negotiations. Lisa, at 26 years old, incorporated the lesson before the battle even started. LLOUD created the capacity to sign acts, control release timing, negotiate directly with streaming platforms, and retain meaningful ownership stakes in her own creative output. In the context of the K-pop industry, where idol contracts have historically been long, comprehensive, and limiting in ways that Western music lawyers have studied and written about extensively, establishing an independent label was not merely a business decision. It was a declaration of operational intent. Industry observers have noted that LLOUD's structural model resembles the kind of artist-owned infrastructure that Western pop stars typically only acquire after a decade or more of major label experience and the leverage that comes with it. Lisa was building this at the beginning of her solo arc, not the end. The solo music strategy. Lisa's solo music releases have been constructed to build Western market credibility without erasing her existing global identity. Her collaborations have been precise, rather than prolific, a distinction that matters enormously in the industry. Prolific suggests chasing audiences. Precise suggests choosing them. The decision to collaborate with Rosalía on New Woman exemplifies this precision. Rosalía represents the most high-profile Spanish-language pop crossover of the current era, an artist who crossed into the Western mainstream on purely artistic terms, without anglicizing her identity. Linking to that conversation at exactly the moment it dominated Western cultural discourse was not accidental. It was positioning. And Lisa's streaming numbers across these releases, across markets including Western Europe and North America, have generated the kind of multi-platform, multi-territory data that changes how streaming platforms assess an artist's negotiating leverage. The brand architecture. Lisa has been among the most strategically selected global brand partners in fashion for years. But the trajectory of those partnerships, beginning in 2024 and accelerating into 2025, began shifting from fashion-forward to market bridge in ways that carry direct industry implications. According to reports, Lisa has been associated with the Nike-Skims collaboration, a major partnership between Nike and Kim Kardashian's Skims brand, explicitly designed to address a globally diverse consumer audience. If accurate, this placement is significant beyond its commercial value. It signals that major American consumer brands are actively seeking to attach themselves to Lisa's image specifically because of her cross-market reach, not despite it. This represents a structural inversion of the historical dynamic. Traditionally, Asian artists were expected to adapt to Western brand aesthetics in exchange for Western market access. The brand extended legitimacy outward as a kind of loan. What is emerging in Lisa's case, according to industry observers, is effectively the reverse: Western brands seeking entry into Lisa's markets. Lisa's demographics, Lisa's cultural currency. The negotiating position has quietly reversed direction. Viva la Lisa! Caesar's Palace, Las Vegas. A Las Vegas residency is one of the most precise and meaningful metrics in the Western live entertainment industry. It is not offered to artists who are merely globally famous. It is offered to artists who have demonstrated consistent, reliable, broad-based, ticket-moving capacity in the single most competitive live entertainment market on the planet. The residency Viva la Lisa at Caesar's Palace, according to reports, represented a moment of genuine landmark status. The kind of Las Vegas headlining placement that, until recently, had been the exclusive province of Western pop royalty. Celine Dion, Britney Spears, Adele, Lady Gaga. Residency artists are not booked because they are interesting. They are booked because their audience is financially reliable. And that audience has to exist in sufficient numbers with sufficient consistency in the American live market specifically. Adding Lisa to that architectural conversation is not a gesture. It is a data point. Always Lalisa, TIFF. The Toronto International Film Festival is among the most prestigious documentary and prestige film showcases in the world. When the Always Lalisa documentary, an intimate examination of Lisa's career, creative process, and personal journey, screened at TIFF, it accomplished something that a music video release or a streaming platform drop simply cannot replicate. It placed Lisa inside the lexicon of Western cultural legitimacy. TIFF is where serious work is taken seriously. Having a documentary about an Asian pop artist screened and discussed in that context shifts the frame from entertainment product to cultural subject, from icon to something closer to auteur adjacent. That distinction matters directly in how Western critics, academic institutions, and, crucially, Western entertainment industry decision-makers categorize an artist. It changes which conversations she is invited into. We are just past the halfway point, and we have not yet arrived at the moves that may prove to be the most historically durable of all. The ones that anchor Lisa's name to the kind of moments that don't disappear from the cultural record. The White Lotus Season 3. HBO's The White Lotus has become one of the defining prestige television properties of the current era. A series that critics, industry peers, and cultural commentators take seriously in a way that few streaming-era productions manage. Season 3, set in Thailand, featured Lisa in a performance that, by critical accounts, demonstrated genuine acting range rather than celebrity stunt casting. This distinction is not trivial. Western entertainment media has a well-documented historical reflex of treating Asian celebrities who cross into acting as curiosities to be noted rather than talents to be assessed. The critical conversation around Lisa's White Lotus performance broke from that pattern in measurable ways. Critics with no particular investment in K-pop were engaging with Lisa as a performer. Industry insiders began discussing her as a multi-hyphenate in the full Western industry meaning of that term. Not a musician who did a cameo, but a creative entity with demonstrated cross-medium range. The structural consequence of that shift is significant. It changes how casting directors, studio executives, and production company development teams categorize her. It changes which rooms she is called into, and which rooms call her first. Netflix projects. According to reports, Lisa has multiple projects in development or production with Netflix, including a project referred to as Taigo and a separate, untitled romantic comedy. Specific details on these remain limited, as is standard for projects in earlier stages of development. But the directional signal is clear. Netflix's subscriber base spans virtually every significant entertainment market on Earth, and the platform has a documented commercial interest in content that moves fluidly between Asian and Western audiences. Lisa, as an anchor for original Netflix content, positions her not merely as talent, but as a platform marketing argument, the kind of artist around whom a streaming service can structure an entire cross-market promotional campaign. FIFA World Cup 2026. The FIFA World Cup opening ceremony is not a music industry event. It is a geopolitical one. The artists selected to perform at opening ceremonies are chosen with a specific communicative intent. They must say something legible to the entire watching world simultaneously. Not to one fan base, not to one market, not to one cultural moment. The audience is not a demographic. It is humanity at its most collectively attentive. According to reports and industry coverage surrounding the 2026 tournament, Lisa's connection to the World Cup opening ceremony carries a significance that extends well beyond any commercial metric. It communicates to every label, every booking agency, every brand partnership team watching, that this artist operates at a scale that transcends the music industry's own category systems. She is not a niche product. She is a global communicator. Coachella 2026. Coverage surrounding Coachella 2026 indicated Lisa's involvement through an augmented reality performance format, a technologically advanced integration of live entertainment and digital physical experience that placed her at the documented frontier of where the live music industry is heading as a format. AR integrated performance is not gimmick territory at Lisa's level. It is frontier territory. The artists who define the next dominant format of live entertainment, whatever that format ultimately becomes, will hold a disproportionate claim on the culture that builds around it. Being an early architect of that space, specifically at a venue with Coachella's cultural authority, compounds over time in ways that are difficult to quantify but impossible to dismiss. Now hold the full picture in view for a moment. A self-owned label, a TIFF documentary, a prestige HBO drama with genuine critical engagement, multiple Netflix original projects, a Las Vegas headlining residency, a FIFA World Cup opening ceremony, a Coachella innovation moment. No single move is a revolution in isolation. But look at the totality. In chess, there is a distinction between tactical play, aggressive, immediate, designed to win the next 3 moves, and positional play, which is slower, less dramatic, and almost impossible to counter once the pieces are correctly placed. Lisa has been playing a positional game for 3 years. The position is nearly unassailable. 3. The rewrite. Historical significance. So let us answer the question this video actually asked. What, specifically, has Lisa silently rewritten about Western music industry history? 3 things, and each one operates on a different level. First, the deal structure precedent. The traditional path for a non-Western artist attempting to enter the Western mainstream was consistent for decades and effectively non-negotiable. You signed with a major Western label, surrendered significant creative and financial control, and used their infrastructure to access their audience. The label owned the masters. The label controlled the timeline. The label managed the narrative. This was not a negotiation. It was the deal. Lisa's LLOUD model inverts that paradigm with real documented commercial results. By building her own label infrastructure before committing to the Western market on the Western industry's terms, Lisa has demonstrated that an Asian artist at the highest level of global fame can negotiate from a position of ownership rather than dependency. This changes the conversation for every Asian artist who enters a Western industry negotiation after her. Not because every artist can replicate the specific leverage Lisa brings to the table, her position is genuinely exceptional, but because the existence of a working model shifts what is considered possible. It shifts what artists ask for. It shifts what their managers demand. And it shifts what labels preemptively offer to artists they cannot afford to lose. In the music industry, precedent is infrastructure, and LLOUD is now precedent. Second, the streaming data argument. For years, a persistent internal argument within the Western industry against taking Asian solo artists seriously as full Western market entities was what industry insiders have described as the streaming discrepancy problem. The logic went as follows. Yes, these artists generate enormous streaming numbers globally, but those numbers are overwhelmingly driven by Asian markets. Western streaming performance tells a different story. Western radio play tells a different story. Western live ticket sales tell a different story. Therefore, the global numbers are, commercially speaking, less relevant than they appear. Lisa's solo catalog has systematically dismantled that argument at the data level. Her streaming performance across English language and mixed language Western markets, across Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube Music, and other major platforms, has generated results that cannot be explained as Asian market overflow. When Rockstar performed as it did across North American and Western European markets, it was a Western market data point, not an anomaly. Not a viral quirk, a replicable, platform-verified result. And data points at that scale change contracts. They change advance offers. They change the ceiling on what an independent artist is considered worth. Third, the representational architecture. This is the argument that is hardest to reduce to a number, and may be the most consequential of the 3. When Lisa enters a negotiating room, a casting discussion, a brand partnership meeting, a festival booking conversation, she is not entering as a representative of K-pop, or as a product of the Korean idol system, or as a peripheral figure in Western entertainment. She is entering as a business entity with her own label, her own multi-territory streaming track record, her own prestige television credit on one of the most discussed dramas of its season, her own documentary in the TIFF catalog, her own Las Vegas headlining residency, and her own documented connection to the largest global sporting event in human history. That profile does not fit the Western industry's existing frameworks for Asian artist. And not because those frameworks have explicitly excluded it, but because they were never built to contain it. And when the existing frameworks cannot contain an artist, the industry does not simply adjust for that artist. It adjusts, slightly, permanently, structurally, for every artist who follows in a comparable position. Now, let us acknowledge the counter-argument, because it deserves a direct response. The counter-argument, and why it falls short. Critics of this framing will argue, with some justification, that Lisa's success is exceptional in a way that limits its structural implications. That she represents the convergence of extraordinary talent, extraordinary timing, an extraordinary pre-existing platform, and circumstances that most artists could never replicate. And therefore, the argument concludes, her individual achievements constitute an exceptional individual navigating a system that remains structurally biased. Not a rewrite. An exception. That is a serious argument. It deserves a serious response. Here is why it ultimately falls short as a final verdict. Systemic change in the music industry has never arrived through policy declarations or industry reform committees. It has always arrived because one artist, or a small number of artists, generated commercial results that made the old system economically irrational to maintain. Elvis did not desegregate American pop music through advocacy. He generated commercial results that made it financially indefensible for labels to ignore Black musical traditions. BTS did not persuade the US music industry to take Korean-language pop seriously through lobbying. They generated commercial results, at scale, across American markets, until the industry had no credible analytical response that didn't require ignoring the data. Lisa is generating commercial results that the Western industry's established frameworks for Asian artists cannot explain, cannot contain, and cannot replicate by following the old model. That is precisely the mechanism through which industry rewrites occur. The question is never whether a single artist single-handedly transformed everything overnight. The question is whether an artist's specific moves made the old rules economically irrational to maintain. On that test, Lisa's case is structurally, historically significant. The fact that most mainstream entertainment press has framed her story as a fandom event, rather than an industry event, is not a rebuttal. It is the gap this kind of analysis exists to fill. So, what has Lisa silently rewritten about Western music industry history? She has rewritten the deal structure. She has demonstrated, with a functioning label and real commercial results, that an Asian artist at the highest level of global fame can build her own infrastructure, rather than rent someone else's at the industry's preferred rate. LLOUD is not a vanity project. It is a proof of concept, and proof of concept is the most powerful document in any industry. She has rewritten the streaming data argument. The numbers that Western industry analysts use to explain away Asian artists' commercial potential in their markets no longer explain away cleanly when Lisa's name is attached to them. The data has shifted. And, in an industry that runs on data, that shift is structural. And she has rewritten the representational architecture, not by demanding a seat at a table that was never designed for her, but by building her own table, in public, piece by deliberate piece, across a multi-year strategy that the industry is only now beginning to fully register. This is what silently rewriting history actually looks like. Not a single viral moment that the press files under novelty and moves on from. Not a chart-topping debut that gets framed as a curiosity and then forgotten. But a sustained multi-year accumulation of structural moves, in business infrastructure, in live performance markets, in prestige entertainment, in brand leverage, in cultural legitimacy, that quietly shifts what is considered possible for every artist who looks like her, who comes from where she comes from, and who refuses to wait for the incumbent industry's permission to operate at the level she is already operating at. The Western music industry has always had gatekeepers, but gates only function if everyone agrees to stand in front of them. And so, the real question, the one worth sitting with after this video ends, is not what Lisa has already done. It is what the industry does next. What does the next deal structure look like, now that LLOUD has proven the independent model at this level? What does the next Asian artist's negotiating position look like, with this data in the room? What does an industry that spent decades treating the entire Asian market as peripheral do when the most followed, most commercially diversified, most multi-hyphenate artist of the current moment is a Thai woman who built her own table and invited the industry to sit down at it? On her terms? We will be covering all of it. If you want to be here when the next piece of this story becomes clear, subscribing is how you stay in the conversation. Drop your analysis in the comments. We read them, and the most interesting ones shape what we investigate next. What do you think she does next?